Today we're going to be talking about things as it relates to cyber liability insurance and the various risks that are associated with that and the ways that you mitigate those risks. And so Josh will be helping us get through all that. And so why don't we go ahead and get to the introduction slide here for the Medical Society.
Okay, thank you, Derrick. Thank you to all of our members who have joined or are joining our program this evening. Just a brief background for you regarding the CME credit that'll be available tonight. This slide is the disclosure slide, which identifies our planning committee members and our two presenters and any disclosures that they have to make, as well as the learning objectives for the program tonight. There are requirements to claim your credit in terms of attendance at this activity, and then you'll need to claim your credits online. How that will happen is in the next 24 hours, you will be receiving an email from me. If you registered through the SLIMS link, I will have that information. If you did not register through the SLIMS link or are not a SLIMS member but are an MD or DO, a physician wishing to participate tonight, send me a message in the chat and I'll be sure to send you the credit claim link. You will get that via email sometime tomorrow, and then you will have 30 days to claim your credit. At the same time, you will be asked to complete a brief evaluation. We really appreciate that feedback. The program tonight qualified for 1.0 Category 1 credits, as you can see there at the bottom. Our joint provider of CME credit for SLIMS is the Institute for International Medicine, InMed, in Kansas City. They're accredited by MSMA in order to provide continuing medical education for physicians. So the online submission and your online communication will be with InMed. The link I provide will direct you to them. They will provide you with the evaluation and the information on how to claim your credit for tonight's program. If you have any questions, you can send me an email or a message in the chat. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gardner, our president, who's going to do a brief welcome before we kick things off.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, everybody. So I'm Dr. Aaron Gardner, 2022 president of the St. Louis Metropolitan Medical Society. I'd like to welcome our members as well as guests from the Healthcare Technology Advisors group to this evening's program. We would like to thank and recognize our two presenters this evening. First off is Derrick Wiesbrod. He's the CEO of Enerva Technology Advisors. And then second is Josh Barker, who is the Senior Account Executive and Advisor at Techrug. The St. Louis Metropolitan Medical Society would like to thank both gentlemen for putting together this evening's program and for agreeing to provide it to our medical society members. If there are any physicians participating in this program this evening who are not members of SLIMS, we would invite you to join us. You can learn more about membership and apply online at slims.org, slmms.org. Without further ado, we'll get the program started, and I will turn things over to Derrick and Josh. Take it away.
Well, I appreciate that introduction, Dr. Gardner and David. So a little bit of brief background on Josh and I. I'm the CEO of Healthcare Technology Advisors. I've been heavily involved in the medical space, going back 20 years, 10 years at Bethesda Health Group, 10 years as an independent consultant. I worked with the Medical Group Managers Association of St. Louis for the last 12 years now. I've been the president of it for 2020, 2021, the VP, 2019 membership, many years prior to that. Got a ton of HIPAA security experience and expertise dating back to before any of us had to be compliant with it. Got my education from Webster University for my undergrad and grad, and then went to MIT for some management and leadership studies in their MBA program. Josh is a senior account executive at Techrug. He's also my insurance agent. And so in looking at how we can help people in the St. Louis community learn more about cybersecurity, and like especially the way cyber liability insurance is like really ratcheting things up and starting to dictate for our clients a lot of measures they need to do that we had previously advised they may need to do. Now it's really becoming required. So he's got almost 20 years of experience in the space. He does property and casualty, life and health. He's working on becoming a certified risk manager, and we love doing these talks together. And so without any further ado, we're going to get into the substance of the conversation today. There are way more risks than I could possibly put out on a single slide. And a lot of these points are things we can make our own presentations about. But in general, there's just so much careless mistakes happening still. Like people are losing their devices and their laptops. I've had people when I was at Bethesda leave laptops in cars because they're doing side jobs and the cars get broken into and stolen. And now we're having to do reporting and submitting to Health and Human Services. And so even though that was like 15 years ago, that's still a super common way that breaches are happening. Hacker related is actually lower than a lot of people might think, but still it accounts for basically 1 in 4 data loss, data theft situations. There's over 1 billion malware variants compared to 80 million in 2009. So that number has really scaled up. 80 million used to sound scary to me, and now it seems like the good old days. And it would be nice to go back to where we had those less sophisticated concerns that still created a lot of concerns in our corporate leadership. And we spent a lot of time on, really providing education and putting controls in place. And like those controls aren't even like relevant today to really stop a lot of the concerns we're now facing. The dark web is a vast resource for hackers and just people trying to get involved in malicious activities. They have like sales on different hacker tools and toolkits that you can get. So like you don't even need to know what you're doing besides being able to get on the dark web to download a kit that basically steps you through how to hack and compromise and steal data. And then they also include components that help you go resell that data back to the dark web, to the various identity theft forums and different stuff like that that they have. We had the COVID-19 pandemic kickoff there in early 2020, and the hackers jumped right on that. They created 16,000 plus new websites related to that, trying to trick you and us into providing data, personal data, so they could take it and sell it. They've hacked Facebook accounts. You can get Facebook accounts hacked or whatever with for hire sales with a coupon. There's just like it's just like pretty insane how much stuff is out on the dark web that's just turnkey solutions to get started on stealing our healthcare data. Josh will jump into some more of these numbers here for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think this is going to be anything that surprises people. It kind of coincides with what you were talking about, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever that was, where we're looking at 80 million variants. Now we're at billions. So the same thing here. The numbers going up by roughly $1 billion every year. We saw a huge jump between 2020 and 2021. And I think a lot of that was directly tied to people working from home, had extra time. The availability, the manipulability of the pandemic, we've seen it with Obamacare, we've seen it with stimulus money, and then COVID was just an easy one to tag on. Everyone was panicked and yeah, let's click the link. Let's go here. This looks like a legit reputable email, reputable site. Great. Boom. That's what we're running into. So that's the huge uptick that we saw between 2020 and 21. But these numbers aren't, I don't see any stopping in the bleeding anytime soon. There's going to be some other global situation, regional, local, whatever, that they're going to exploit. That's what people take advantage of. So the numbers are on the rise, and we've just got to be on guard, be aware that they're happening. And I think sometimes what you do find, we become numb to it, right? All these things, it's just like you could put the news on replay any given day and then just insert new city, insert new business, and someone else is hacked. So we're a little bit numb to it, and we're just inundated with it all the time. So it is difficult to stay vigilant with the frequency and the volume of which we're seeing. But yeah, I mean, billions and billions of dollars in those things. So, we kind of want to look at where are these things coming from? What type of trends are we seeing here? They've got them broken down by year, but it's no shocker. The darker line here, I apologize. I took this off of I believe it was off the FBI website. They run a SI3, I think is the report that they run annually. And so wasn't able to get this in color. This was, I wish it was a little more definitive to look at, but the darkest line is the most recent year. So this is kind of where the things are coming from. You'll notice the very top there, extortion, ransomware, those things are on the decline. They were down about 50% from the year prior, 2020. That was the hot button. Last year, it cooled down a little bit. I feel like personally, we're seeing a lot of that. But your biggest thing is the phishing scams. It's looks like a legit email from someone inside your organization. They do a fantastic job of making a mimic account. You might have, AB, I'm trying to think, like dog.com. Well, maybe that O in dog is a 0. So it looks identical. They're using the same logo. Again, we're dealing with cyber criminals. So copyright infringement, and that's our trademark logo. That means nothing to them. They want to use those things to get you in there. So a lot of it is just, they want people to take the bait. And I think a lot of times we all think, well, who would fall for that? This email was all botched up grammatically, capitalizations, it just doesn't flow. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So someone's taking the bait. They send these things out buckshot. And that's, again, why your information is important. They don't necessarily need your social, your credit card numbers. That they want email accounts. They want to be able to blast you, and they're going to get you to give them the information because you click the link, you open the email, whatever the case may be. So that seems to be the trend now, is they're getting people to make the mistakes. They're getting you to open the door for them more so than it was, going out targeting and attacking like we were seeing, 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, one interesting thing I think about the ransomware side or the extortion side of it is you'll go through and see some lulls in that activity. And usually everyone's regrouping. They're like, all right, we've kind of run the course on some of these variants that we're pushing through. And they go back and sharpen their skills. And then the following year, it comes back more and more fierce, more targeted, more sophisticated. And so I don't take any comfort in seeing the numbers dip. I just am seeing that next year, they're just gearing up for, making it rain.
Well, and one of the things that's not a breakdown on this particular chart is that folks have very good backup solutions. We've got more redundancies out there with the solutions that you and your team are providing, Derrick. So it's not that we can't get the data back. We can wipe the machines, restore from when they left yesterday at 5 o'clock, and we're good to go. So what you're now seeing is they're turning that around and saying, well, we've got sensitive information. We've got information that you might have to, you don't want your competitors to see. We've got, this, that, or the other. So they'll kind of hold that over your head to still get the payment. But I think a lot of people are balking at that for now. But like you said, it's going to morph. It's going to turn into something different, and they're going to find a different avenue where they're able to go in and cut the backups, loop around those solutions that every vendor is coming out with. This is a journey. It's not a destination kind of thing. So it's like, oh, well, I put this, software on my computer 5 years ago. Well, that's great. I used to have, a cassette player in my first car. Don't have it now. Things change. It doesn't quite work the same anymore. I don't think my car now has a CD player. So, it's just, we've gone digital. So it's the same thing here. We've got to always be working to get ahead of where these bad actors are going. The problem that we have on the above board type businesses is that we have to operate in an ethical manner. They don't, so they can move much faster. And if it doesn't work, they don't have to answer to shareholders or their customers. They just try something else next time. So that is the disadvantage that we all have versus their side of things, where you just try it doesn't work, no worries, on to the next thing.
Yeah. So, to kind of summarize that, the causes of concern are phishing, and really spear tip phishing is just a more focused version of a phishing attack. And I'll show you the mechanics of that here in a moment. Ransomware ties hand in hand with phishing attacks. So the more data they can phish from you, the more ransomware attacks they're going to be sending your way. There's always the insider risk. People inside your company, whether it's malicious or non-malicious, need to have training, need to be de-risked. There's certain human resources things we need to be doing to eliminate some of those concerns. After the pandemic, we really moved to a remote workforce, not so much in healthcare, especially in like smaller clinics and stuff like that, where we can't do a lot of those jobs outside the clinic. But that has definitely increased a lot of causes for concern with the home offices just really not being up to speed with anything. The whole Russia thing is an additional sidebar we are dealing with this year. The loss of your operating and personal funds due to paying out ransoms is a big concern. The variants are getting harder to detect, so you need to have like next generation malware protection in place. You can't just have like a regular antivirus and think it's okay. Of the 620 million attacks launched, 442,000 were new ones. To me, that's like a troubling number. So the simplest way to think about a phishing attack is there's three components to it. There's the bait. They drop something out there, get your attention. It's Amazon deliveries having a problem. They'll send things to like doctors. One I saw happen to a hospital is they sent out bonus emails to doctors, and they had it for the right bank, but there was plenty of information in there that was incorrect, and took them to a bogus portal, collected their data, and continued on to the attack surface and getting after individual doctors' data is more than just like going after the hospital itself. So you have to be very mindful of like, does your human resources team send bonus information out a particular way? And like, there's like a lot of different training available for it, but it always comes in three parts. There's something, a headline that gets your attention. Oh, I'm going to give you a bonus, or whatever it is, I'll get the package to you, or hey, you won $1 million. And then they deliver the payload, whether it's them downloading the, having you go to a place and give them the data, or in the event of a ransomware attack, which has a very similar process and usually works in combination with the phishing attack. In this case, the attack would be putting some kind of payload on the computer that is, sometimes they'll sit there quietly and like let it run. So it's hard to track back down and go through your event logs and figure out when did it happen. A lot of attacks can take 180 days to be executed because they're poking around, seeing what else they can learn once they get into the system and they get their Trojan on there. So, but they're both very similar in nature as far as the process. It's just the ransomware delivers an actual executable that gets put on your device. Where the phishing attack, you're giving up some kind of personal data that they're going to then use to go after you, even in a more deep, sophisticated way.
Well, I think with a lot, like from the insurance side, the majority of the claims that we're seeing on those fronts, I think they say they're in the victim's system for on average 3 months.
Yeah.
So they're sitting in there for 90 days. They've got key loggers. You don't have to give them your password. They'll see that when you go to this site, you put in these characters. Okay, there's your password, right? So they sit in there and watch until, usually they'll wait till the most vulnerable time. Hey, it's a holiday weekend coming up. That always freaks me out anymore is, Labor Day is coming up. the 4th of July was over the weekend this year. It's like, what are we going to see? Because they know people are shutting down early. They're just trying to get out of Dodge and, I got to get the family on the road or whatever. So those are the times when they know they've got you. So that's when they'll deploy the attack. But they've been sitting in there for this, if they're going to hit you on Labor Day, they've been in there since June. That's the kind of stuff that I think people don't realize. It's like it's happening on the back end without you knowing. They're very sophisticated.
Yeah, there was like one financial one with this banking system that was more in the phishing space, and they were monitoring the they had got into the bank CEO's email, and it was like a Gmail account. They didn't have two-factor authentication set up. Most people use the same password for everything, which makes it really easy for people. And so they knew when the vacation was coming up for this person. It was like an overseas bank, and they dropped the controller of the bank an email from the bank CEO's Gmail account and said, "Hey, I forgot to get these wires done before I left. Can you take care of this for me?" And the controller does it. And it's in the range of like 140, $150 million, of which at last check, they only ever recovered like 12 million of it. And so they didn't even have to put a software on the computer to do that. They just had to like type in the way that the bank CEO typed, like use that person's language. They studied the org chart of the business to know who the players were that they could do that with. They waited for social media to tell them when the dude's going to be on vacation, and you're able to also look at like when they're buying bank account or buying plane tickets and different stuff like that and booking trips. And so they just laid in wait and was nice and patient and got a huge payday out of it. But the mechanics are similar, and they do linger around. They will wait for the time to get the best payload, because like waiting 3 months to net 112 out of 150 million bucks, that's a really good 3-month period. So we've also got risk inside our business. We basically had the great resignation going on, and it's still going on. If any of us go out and try to like order food anywhere, we see it. If we're trying to hire and like staff our front desk and make sure our check-in and check-out workflows are staffed, we know that our practice managers are sitting in there filling in those jobs half the time. They're not able to focus on doing their practice management job. And so it's just like there's just been a big brain drain. There's not as many people seeking to work right now. And so, we're losing like a lot of internal data just from like the knowledge of our operations leaving, and then having to retrain and go through a lot of that cycle. So yeah, it's like trying to keep that staffing going. It's important. And this has nothing to do with people being malicious. This is just like, we're losing our knowledge, and like, then we have to staff, retrain people, get them used to our culture and our way. And so there's just like a lot of data that just disappears when people disappear. Besides that, you also have the concern. I've been around the medical space long enough. I've watched people in practice management roles and bookkeeper roles and in different roles who are not being managed, and that they got access to QuickBooks and there's not appropriate oversight. Like, you don't have your CPA looking over the numbers every month. I've watched multiple people get arrested and fired sitting there stealing data and money for years before they get caught. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who aren't getting caught and quit and leave, and time goes on and that doesn't happen. But that's just like here in St. Louis, in our very small community. The peers, people I thought were peers and not problems. So you got to be very mindful of your internal workforce this period. Like, if you're suspicious, you need to have some oversight. And there should just be controls in place on all that.
Well, I think, we all see this, right? The exodus, the lack of people. Like, my wife's in the healthcare industry, and it's just staffing, having the right number of people in there to do the day-to-day isn't there. So we're all wearing multiple hats. And, obviously those were 3 positions before for a reason. So to get one person to try to do all this, you're just asking someone to take on a lot. Mistakes are going to happen. And, in this context, a typo can really be a financial problem. It could be something very minimal. It's not necessarily even the intentional side of things. I know that's what kind of the numbers are suggesting there, but sometimes it's just mistakes because we're human and we're just at capacity so often anymore.
Yeah, that's why, like, it's super important to make sure people stay, like, HIPAA requires that we provide a certain amount of cyber security training, and used to, I thought that was sufficient. And the way the threat landscape's changed the last 3 to 4 years, like, it's the basic training that HIPAA requires isn't sufficient enough to prevent insider mistakes, like our employees creating issues where they fall for a phishing attack, and now someone's inside the network watching and waiting, laying in wait.
It's the equivalent of taking a CPR class and then trying to perform surgery, right?
Yeah.
They're not quite the same requirements to get there.
No. So remote work really just, like, has led to a lot more, making people a lot more vulnerable to phishing attacks. It's harder to control the machines at home, especially when they're people's personal computers. So, like, you have your safe, secure network at the office, and as soon as people go home, their kids are all over their computers. They share their passwords to get on there, and then they have links to work. And I just recently had to deal with the situation with clients' home network who declined the opportunity to have the same controls that she had at her office at her home. And that led to using all the same passwords on all the same stuff on her financial stuff, the same as her healthcare systems. And, like, Wi-Fi was insecure. She had, like, when she asked us to come in and, like, take a look at it, there was at least 6 different people, entities, devices on her network actively probing and looking at things. And her devices just weren't secured. And, we went through and cleaned all that up and tightened it down to how it should be. But, like, people like it easy. And, like, when we're at home, we want it to be easy. At work, we also want it to be easy, but we know it's work. And so we tend to behave a little bit differently there than we do at our personal life and our home life. But if the devices at our home are connecting to our PHI data, our financial data, you need to treat those the same way that you treat any device inside your business network, and should have all the same protections. It needs to make sure if you're connecting with a VPN before you connect to any other resources inside your business network. You need to have the same next generation malware protection on there, and computer needs to be encrypted just like it is at the house, and all that kind of stuff. And, like, that was so slow and happening that it definitely created a lot of additional problems with the pandemic raging on and all that. I'm sure you saw plenty of insurance claims that came in just through that side of the equation.
Oh, it brought a whole new world of things that we had never really had to consider before. It was just a huge shift. And so, you've seen it on the applications you're completing. We're asking about all kinds of work from home stuff that we're, like, never even thought of 5-10 years ago. So it's been a huge eye opener. Those vulnerabilities have always been there. A lot of people had the ability to work remote, but when the majority of people started wanting to work remote, and that's, I think, one of the things that people are prioritizing when selecting an employer is, do I have flex time? Do I have the ability to work from home? Well, you're going to have some give and take with that. You want that flexibility and, fit it into your lifestyle. You also need to realize that you've got to have the security measures in place, just like you would at the office. So yeah, it was a huge eye opener for our industry. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons you're seeing so many carriers either jack up rates or just leave the space altogether, because there's just things they never accounted for when they were, doing all their breakdowns for financials and things like that. It was never allotted for. And so here we are.
Yeah, you mentioned my insurance application this year. The very first year when we started this business, filling it out, it was like a 1-pager. It was like some basic demographic data. How many computers are we supporting? What's our revenue? It took like 10 minutes to complete. And I'm in the IT space, like, I'm doing this every day. And it still took me over 4 hours to like really button up all the questions, get through it's like a risk assessment, basically, is what we're doing now for insurance applications. Yeah.
And that's only going to continue to go that direction. I mean, that's the next step is they'll want to get in your environment and start seeing it. They're not going to take your word for it anymore. I get it. When you've got billions and billions of dollars on the line, I'd be asking additional questions too.
Yeah. So another risk before we get into the cyber insurance details and a little more in depth there is when we were originally putting this together, the war in Ukraine was just getting started. And so we've had a little bit more time to pay attention and see what's going on. We did see a big ramp up of Russia cyber attacks ahead of their invasion of Ukraine. They are the most sanctioned country in the world. They need to be able to fund the conflict. Cryptocurrency doesn't care about your dollar. It doesn't care about your euro. It crosses all government borders. And that's how ransomware attacks are paid. They're paid in Bitcoin typically. And so we have seen a little bit of an uptick in additional attacks. A lot of them have been really focused at trying to disable a lot of the Ukrainian infrastructure and telecom, and pushing out misinformation and this, that, and other thing. But I still believe like if they're going to keep this up, they're going to have to raise funds because they're like limited on how they're able to bring money in with all the sanctions. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we see another, an uptick in just Russian focused cyber attacks, trying to get more ransomwares out, get their paydays up, make sure they can continue to fund their operations.
Absolutely.
So what do? There's plenty of things we can do. Conducting a risk assessment is a very foundational activity to do. And if you've applied for cyber security insurance at all recently, you've done some level of a risk assessment. But it's good to do those annually just to make sure you don't have gaps opening up you thought were closed. You hire a cybersecurity firm to come in and help run internal scans, external scans, and make sure the things are being taken care of. You get insurance to deal with whenever you do have a compromise. I don't feel it's a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. There's just like way too much activity in the space to be naive enough to believe it won't happen to me or it won't happen to you. Practice NIST standards, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Like all the HIPAA rules and any other like cyber laws that are in place here in the US, they're just based on NIST standards, which is just the best practice way of doing IT and cybersecurity. And so like they do vary between HIPAA and PCI and FINRA and just all these other ones, but they're some variation of the 120 plus NIST frameworks. It's just a variation of those. So essentially, as long as you're deploying your NIST standards, you're going to be doing a really good job of complying with HIPAA and making sure you're closing a lot of holes and reducing a lot of risk. Conducting routine cybersecurity training, very important. And it shouldn't just be like a once a year thing or once every other year thing. It should be an annual thing. There should be some level of like at least monthly touch points to remind the staff about your culture of having cybersecurity in place and like what it is, how to look for it. Really recommend that there's some level of like phishing, like cyber phishing training. There's like a ton of tools out there to do it. But that's, ways we can figure out what our risks are and work on starting to de-risk our space.
Absolutely. So, here's some numbers that we're throwing at folks that, just kind of what we're seeing across our industry. Obviously, we saw the graphs earlier. 21, was worse than any year we've had in the past few. I've seen some numbers from carriers talking about they've seen double, triple stuff this year at this point, at the 6-month point this year than they did last year. And it's like, well, if 21 was so bad and 22 is already on pace to be, twice as bad, that's just kind of where we're going. This thing, the trend is a bell curve. We've almost got this exponential growth on where we're going there. But I think what, I kind of hit on it earlier that people are numb to this. So everyone, the stuff that we see on TV, the things in the news or on social media, it's the larger companies, it's international organizations. Well, the reason for that is because we all have tie-ins to maybe a Home Depot, an Equifax, or, insert whoever, because we've all kind of been exposed to shopping there or been a consumer in some way, shape, or form of those organizations. But the reality is, 60% of the attacks that we see, they're on small businesses, right? So, or 43% of the attacks are on small businesses. So those things don't make the radar. The 2-person CPA firm, the 3-doctor practice, those don't make the news. You just go out of business and start over, and that's not what a lot of us want to do. The scary thing is 60% of the folks that are hit with an attack, they're out of business within 6 months. And I don't have any specifics on whether or not they had insurance or not, how that helped out. I've got to assume that having some sort of cyber insurance to foot the bill for those things are good, but there's also the reputational aspect of, they had a breach, I'm going to go take my business down the street. So I feel like that number may also reflect folks, whether they did or did not have insurance. My guess is, tilts a little more to the folks that didn't. The healthcare sector was the second most targeted industry in 2021. So speaking to your group, you guys are a high value target in a regulated industry. PHI is valuable on the dark web and what you can do with that. So, when 21% of all the claims globally, 1 in 5 claims that are getting turned in around the world are coming from the healthcare industry. Records exposed, PHI, it accounts for almost 1/4 of all data that's out there. It's just one of those things that there is a desire to have the information that you guys all have access to. And so we can't be naive to it. We can't just stick our head in the sand and say, it can't happen to me. It's not going on. That's not going to work. So we've got to be diligent. We've got to be aware of the risk. Obviously, we can't just unplug the computers and go back to paper files and fax machines, but we've got to operate in a more intelligent manner. We've got to basically be the first line of defense. All the products and solutions that Derrick and the other IT professionals and software vendors out there provide, they're great. But at the end of the day, we've got to keep ourselves out of our own way. And I think that's, goes back to the training and the knowledge and just being aware of what's out there. Once you're aware of something, it's very hard to ignore it or just, disregard it. Let's see here. So, Derrick kind of hit on this a little bit ago. We want to conduct a risk assessment. Let's find out where we are. It's no different than going in for an annual physical. How are things looking? Is our blood pressure good? Do we need to look at this? Are we eating right? Are we exercising? All those things are great. But if I go out and I been on vacation last week, so I really got to hit it here soon, but just going out and eating right for a week and maybe walking a couple nights, I'm not any healthier than I was. I'm not in a better position. I may have been for that week, but 6 months from now, my waistband isn't going to be any looser because of that one time. It's the same thing. It's an ongoing thing. Let's identify where we're at, set a baseline, and then develop a program for how we're going to implement fixes to those types of deficiencies. Because there is a price point to all this. We all have a budget, Derrick, I don't know if you've ever come across anybody. I've never come to anybody with a blank check that just says, I want it all, and charge me whatever you feel like, right? So some of these things, especially if you're coming from zero, if you're not doing anything today, you're going to see some sticker shock, but if we can implement, hey, these items according to NIST are just vital, must-have critical situations. Let's address these first. These ones are phase 2, these are phase 3, and over the next year, 2, 3 years, we can get you guys in a pretty good spot. That's what we want to do. Resolving these gaps, it may cost some money on the front end to pay for the training, to pay for the services, the licensing, and the support, and all the stuff that goes along with that. But it's going to ensure your longevity as a business and as a practice, that all your clients aren't running for the hills. You're not getting those requests to, send my records to doctor down the street kind of thing, right? We want to keep them in network. Onboarding is a pain in the butt, regardless of what business you are. Keep your clients happy, keep them there. So if we can avoid these pains on the front, we don't have the PR nightmares. We don't have the, we lost all your information or we exposed your record situations. And then just figure out the process to implement these things, what it's going to look like, and having an understanding of where that stuff goes. That's I think going to be the best course of action to navigate the waters.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen, like, we're working with a client right now that went from having no IT to growing to the point where they understood, like, we just can't handle this ourselves. And there's like really nothing configured for security. Antivirus malware was like all over the place, if it existed at all. And like, I mean, a lot of the stuff we do in a server-based environment, it's just configurations we have to change and push out. It's not like we're having to buy a tool or like go make a major investment or whatever. It's just like IT resource time to go and make these configurations so they fit within NIST. Now, if you don't have a firewall, obviously you need to buy one of those. Like, everyone should have a enterprise class firewall. There should be some basic blocking and tackling, but a lot of it's just like, one-time labor investments to get you brought up to a baseline level.
And sometimes it's just that comfort, right? Like I have an Android phone. It crapped out a few years back and I had to borrow one of my daughter's old iPhones. I hated the iOS system. Sorry if that upsets anyone. It's just my preference. But it's relearning some of the processes and getting familiar and used to doing it one way. Go around and start shaking people's hand left-handed. It's going to feel weird for a while. And, after a month, it's going to feel pretty normal to you. So same thing here. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. It's going to be a little new and weird, but you'll get through that. And it may actually it may make you a more profitable organization. It may give you better workflow too. So it's not just, blocking out the bad guys. It may actually help your organization internally just be a better functioning machine.
Yeah, we do see a lot of that too. Once we get into implementing some of the NIST, it just like saves multiple steps in various workflows and stuff like that. So it definitely does offer process advantages as well.
Absolutely. So let's see here. You want to walk them through this one, Derrick?
Sure. So as Josh pointed out, I just had to go through my insurance application process this year, and to my surprise, it was an extra 2.5 hours longer than last year. And so they're taking a lot deeper dives on like what's going on in the server environment, what configurations do you have employed. You have a firewall, so what's your firewall actually doing? Is it like doing these like 12 important things, or is it just a firewall that's sitting there with no security subscriptions and no services active, so it's only blocking like 600 malware variants instead of 1 billion? They want to make sure that, like with HIPAA, patient data is on a need to know basis, as should be access to various software tools in your business. So not everyone should have like an admin login for their computer so they can just install anything, or they get taken by a phishing attack that moves to a ransomware attack. If they have admin rights, they can install malware really easy and it doesn't have to be sophisticated. You need to make sure your backups are stored offsite. Anymore with cloud environments, that's pretty easy to do in 15-minute increments even. Some people just do it in the evening. You want to make sure you're testing your backup. One nightmare scenario I had was with a series of derm practices, and our February function for their HIPAA compliance as a service function was to recover their EMR from backup, which is like pretty easy. Like my instructions for it were like as long as a slide. And I went to try to do it after hours one night to, not impact patient workflow and stuff. And I couldn't pull it off. It should be like not a very complicated process to do. And I was like, man, maybe I'm tired. I decided that after I tried it at a second client site, I just remoted it and pulled up their instructions, which are basically identical to this other client's. Couldn't pull it off. Came back a couple days later. It's like, all right, I'm well rested. Can't be a tired thing. Try it again. Just read the 6 steps. Again, not very hard. Didn't work at the other client, didn't work at the third client, called the EMR company, said, hey, I can't recover from backup. There's something going on. They're like, oh, whatever. And then they remoted in, couldn't do it. We remoted into the second one, couldn't do it. The third one couldn't do it. They tried it on their system, couldn't do it. Whoever was in charge of the quality assurance portion of their software rollout for the backup system just saw that it recorded a time duration. It started, it stopped, it presented like it had some gigabytes on it. But in fact, it was not a good backup. It wasn't usable. And all 1,200 of their clients were operating like that for 5 months until I was coming in and doing a test recovery to be proactive to make sure it's actually a good backup, because your backup's only as good as your last test recovery. So that really hammered home assumptions I had, and like they're no longer assumptions, like it has to be done. You want to make sure you've got firewalls protecting your external access to systems. At home, you need to have a proper business class firewall if you're like connecting in, or at least have a really solid VPN, but I'd recommend both. Everyone needs to have like their own individual username and password. There's no sharing of IDs because you can't conduct an investigation to figure out where the liability falls if you're using shared passwords or generic logins. They're also asking me a bunch of questions about my security awareness training on my application. Fortunately, we do our HIPAA compliance every year with Compliancy Group, but I've also rolled out additional cybersecurity training for my staff and like weekly updates. And we're doing all the phishing training internally. And like, this is all stuff that Josh's company is asking me to be able to prove I'm doing. So fortunately, like, we're doing it, which makes my policy a lot more affordable. You want to make sure you have next generation malware protection. They've kind of gone away from just the general antivirus language on the cybersecurity applications. They really want that next generation tools in place, and they need to be getting multiple updates every, daily. You want to make sure you're using encrypted connections from remote access, like I mentioned earlier, with like a VPN. This next one, the MFA, multi-factor authentication. So it's like you get a text to your phone that gives you a code, or you've got a little authenticator program that's just changing the code every 30 seconds for that system. You need to have those tools in place, because otherwise it's like really, once your email is compromised, because like everyone uses the same password, it gets bought on the dark web, they get into your Gmail or your Hotmail or whatever kind of email you're using, and it's game over. Like now they can start navigating, imitating you, representing as you, and it's so easy to fix, and it takes like an extra 2 seconds to log in to do that. You store less than 250,000 PII records. One record indicates a person. So just the more records you store, the bigger your risk is when you have an issue, because now if you have all 250,000 compromised, you have a duty to report, and we'll cover that in a moment. You really want to segment your payment card data from your regular business network, which is super easy to do. Most banks kind of force us to do it anyways. You have a disaster recovery plan in place that you're testing annually, which feeds back into at least doing your test recovery annually. Process to review all the content on your intranet and social media to make sure you're not violating any copyright rules or disparagement or infringement or PHI disclosures and stuff like that. You have to attest that you're not aware of any cyber incidents or PHI compromises or any kind of issues that could have compromised data. You have to answer, are you storing payment card data? Are you storing healthcare data? Because like if we're storing that data, that increases our liability, because if that data gets compromised, now we're looking at a duty to report. It's nice to outsource that payment card stuff, so you're not dealing with it internally. It just like lowers your risks. If it's stored within your network, you need to work on segmenting it, making sure it's encrypted, and all that. But like really want to keep that payment stuff as segmented from your PHI as practical. They want to know you're HIPAA compliant. We're in healthcare. Like, I have to be HIPAA compliant because I'm a business associate that pretty much just works with doctors. We have to encrypt all our PHI data that's stored, especially on portable devices and media. All employees with access to healthcare information need to at least receive that HIPAA awareness training annually. I don't think that's enough anymore. So as far as social engineering and cybercrime, the components of the insurance assessment, they want specific training about phishing. They want training about want verification that you're actually doing employee background checks, especially if they're transferring money back and forth. You have dual sign off for payments over 10 grand. You want to be able to verify the existence and ownership of the new clients, customers, and suppliers. All requests to change contact or banking details needs to be verified with a known contact. Someone can't just like call in and say they were with the company and change financial information. Like, there needs to be controls in place for that. You need to make sure you've got someone verifying invoices against purchase orders prior to issuing payments. Make sure there's not fraudulent ones in there. Someone's skimming off the top, creating invoices to get paid out to their own personal bank accounts. The problem is risk of answering these questions falsely or inaccurately is a huge problem. And it's, like I said, it took me 4 hours to get through mine, start to finish. And I had to sit down with my lead engineer to like verify some of my assumptions, go through and verify the configurations are in fact in place. Because answering falsely and we have a breach or hack that's related to that takes the insurance company off the hook. And their job is to not pay out a bunch of money erroneously. So like if we're answering these questions, we have to be honest, because it's better to pay a little bit more on your policy because you don't have something in place than to just be like, they'll never know, fill it out, you have a problem. It's not too hard to like determine, did you have that in place or not? And if you lied about it, that's now more financial liability on your side, and you're even more likely to become one of the businesses that goes under. Breach notifications are like super expensive. You got the cost of postage, you got the cost of the stamp, you got to print the paper, you got to hire someone to stuff the envelope, take the envelope, mail the envelope. So you can factor like $2 per envelope, right? And if you had 50,000 PHI records of individuals compromised, you're looking at $100,000 notification that's required by HIPAA as part of their breach notification rule that became way more strict in 2013 with the omnibus rule going into effect. And the other
that's just to tell them they may have had their information compromised. That's the general, hey, we had a breach. That doesn't factor in actually setting up for the potentially impacted individual to go find out on the 800 number website, were they specifically exposed? If so, now we've got the credit monitoring and all the follow-up cleanup work. So this is just step one, mail a letter, we had a problem. This isn't, the privacy breach total bill. This is the appetizer.
Getting started.
We haven't had the main course yet.
Yeah. So that can run up cost really, really fast. And then, like a lot of you, I'm a business owner and I can be held liable for these issues, and I'm not trying to take that risk on individually. So we've got to be diligent. We, have your IT team like come in, pay them what they need to get paid to do the work to make sure all your answers are honest and accurate, because you don't want to be misrepresenting what you're doing on these claims. They are just the way the cybersecurity stuff's going. It's just way more onerous on our end to be responsible and honest and not be making these payouts. So I'll touch on just some top level stuff on how to make sure your IT services are secure as we're getting toward the end here, but make sure you're having your IT team do proactive maintenance, which is making sure all your Windows and third-party software is being patched. Should happen at least monthly, ideally more. Make sure you've got your next generation malware protection and stuff like that on there. Make sure you've got support for your EMR software. Like, don't let that support expire. That way, because if you let that expire, then you won't get all the security updates, and then your PHI can be at risk and be a problem. I know some people try to save some budget there, but it's not worth it in the long run. You want to look at your current controls, make sure they're appropriate configurations are deployed. So some basic checklist stuff, and this presentation will be on our YouTube page and Facebook page afterwards, and I'm happy to send the slide deck out to anyone that would like it if you guys don't have it already. But device encryption is important. Get rid of those local admin credentials. If you have to have local admin credentials, they need to be strong. Limit sharing via cloud applications. Make sure you've got mobile device management. Basically, so like if you guys lose a device, someone steals it, your IT team can push out wiping abilities so it is destroyed. You want to make sure you're being very secure for your remote files, your emails, and other data, like we touched on earlier. Multi-factor authentication, and already talked about the third-party patching. Make sure on-site tickets are approved by the manager, ensure it's necessary. Make sure there's centrally managed tools your team's using to protect you. Review your incident response procedures. A new one that we've been seeing a lot is the whitelisting is becoming a lot more important. So like only applications that are approved can run on any given device. So that's definitely been a lot more relevant the last year or so. You want an employee checklist. So you want to know, make sure MFA is turned on for all employees that access systems remotely. Make sure there's like an auto lock. So whenever computers aren't being used, they're secured. I mean, make sure you're not talking around strangers and sharing PHI, that kind of stuff. Make sure you're not having someone shoulder surf as you're coming into your buildings. Make sure the security training is being provided. Stay muted when on video and conference calls. Define your home workspace. It's not a place where the kids play games on the computer. Make sure the available times of work are communicated between the employer and the employee. Try to show up early for meetings. Like everyone on here does a super great job of it today. Super impressed with that. Let's see. Security awareness checklist, corporate versus personal. Don't share your corporate tools with the family. Again, it's like, don't let the kids get on devices connecting to work stuff or your brother or sister or whatever. Limit your social media use, especially as it relates to like, oh, we got an upcoming vacation, especially as business leaders, like putting that stuff out there just lets anyone that's watching us set the stage for an attack while we're gone. And again, I keep saying this a lot, but it's really important. Make sure you're providing that cybersecurity training to all your workforce members. Other things that you can do, if you want me to do any of this stuff for free for you, just send an email to info@htadvisorsllc.com with the subject line free, and I'll schedule with you to make sure your Office 365 health audit's in good place. I'll give you a remote work checklist. I'll do a top level business risk assessment with you, and I'll do a dark web credential scan. 100% free, just as, you know, really I like working with David. He's always been real helpful, and I want to make sure his membership is taken care of. And so I told him I would, in addition to pulling Josh in to help provide this education, we'd also give you guys some free services just to make sure his members are taken care of.